very fortunate. Accounting is a big space for us. Banking and financial services is as well. First responders, we've done a lot of work for police departments, fire departments, healthcare, industrial and scientific, education, insurance, government, associations and foundations, consumer packaged goods, retail and hospitality, consulting, media, and so on, and then technology, real estate, transportation. So you can see these are the 162 clients. If you actually took the time to add up the clients on this page, it would be 162 clients over 12 years. We're very proud of this client list. We've done some really good work. So you don't have to believe us, but I can tell you we know what we're doing. And I hope you agree with us at the end of today's session. We also have multiple Latino leadership series. There's one series for Latinos. There's another series for Latinas. And then there's another series for organizations who are looking to hire Latinos and Latinas, engage them, develop them, and advance them. So we have multiple series. I'm also the author of a series of books on leadership called the CTR Factor Leadership Series. The first of the series is out. It's on Amazon. It sells for the princely sum of $4.99. We tried to keep the price low. It wasn't any more than a cup of Starbucks coffee. We're biased, but we think it's a very good book. The second book is coming out in a couple of weeks, and we'll have book releases about every month or so for the next 9 months. It's a 9-book series. We'd love for you to potentially at least look at it. And if you like it, please go ahead and purchase it. It's not a lot. Here are some of our coordinates, our web presence, our email, our phone number. I would love for you to text us. 31996 is the text number. And if you text CTR, then we have a complimentary text-based coaching program that we'll enroll you in. If you do that, obviously you don't have to do any of these things, but we'd love for you to do that. We want this to be the first of a long engagement with you and your professional careers, okay? We are family, and we don't just do, a single shot, one and done. We'd love to engage with you in the long term. That's why I'm providing you multiple ways to connect with us and stay connected with us. I'm on LinkedIn. Reach out and connect to me. If you like this presentation, please write us a recommendation on LinkedIn. If you didn't like it, mention that as well. We will take that feedback and try to do better the next time. Here's the program. I want you to tell you a little bit about myself. I am the CEO of CTR Factor for 12 years. We've been around. I've also held C-level roles at companies like Verizon, CenturyLink, Capital One, Barclays, and McKinsey. And I've served as Chief Learning Officer at Alpha, as I mentioned to you, Kaleidoscope, another diversity company, and Diversity MBA. And I'm a recovering engineer by training. I have a BS in civil engineering, an MS in structural engineering, MBA in marketing, and a DBA in strategy. Now, my wingman, and he called himself the wingman, right? He said, have you seen Top Gun, Surrey? If you have, then I'm your wingman. So my wingman today is Ed Vargas. Ed, please tell us a little bit about yourself, my friend.
Surrey, and hello to everybody joining us today. I'm sure we have a diverse audience. Again, I'm Ed Vargas. Someplace that used to be called Santa Clara Valley is now called Silicon Valley. So welcome to the San Francisco Bay Area. When I graduated from Santa Clara University in business and law school, I had 3 career goals. One was to have a senior position in whatever organization I was in at the age of 30. 2, at some point travel as a business person on an international level. And 3, one of the reasons why I'm here today is paying it forward. Started off in the packaging industry, got a chance to work as a person in the sales and product development side, and all of a sudden a recession hit. We had the major client we had left to relocate, and I stepped in to become the vice president for sales and marketing. We not only replaced the largest customer that we had, but we increased our size. We had to double to getting another manufacturing location, and that was during a recession. So from that, I got recruited into an area that got me into being I had 3 hats on. I was the publisher, editor, and conference director for an international publishing company. And that really gave me an opportunity to expand from in the United States. We developed conferences in North America, from the US to Canada. And then my assignment was that they wanted to establish a presence in Japan. So I had a chance to learn how to work with the culture when I didn't even speak the language. From that point, I got involved in my own consulting business because as establishing a family, I realized that the 2 weeks that I would spend on the road traveling was a bit much. So I focused and started my own consulting business. Got involved with things working with other consulting groups and did some diversity work there at Kaiser Permanente, an HMO based in the Bay Area. I've also had other roles as a consultant where I was brought in as the acting president for the Hispanic Community Foundation. I was the director for marketing and communications for the World Affairs Council, president for Latinos in Communications, and then got into AT&T, Pacific Bell, SBC, AT&T, and really got involved with the employee resource groups there. So the last 2 years that I was there at AT&T, I was the executive vice president on the national board for the ASEMOS ERG, and helped them start back in the day when I first joined, helped them start something called High Tech Day, where they bring in local high school students for STEM workshops. So I've got a real passion right now with the amount of information that's out there. Want to share some of that with you about the incentives and what we can do as Latinos, Hispanics to grow even further. Just to close, I have had the opportunity, I'll be doing a video in a day or two. The local ABC's television station will feature me as one of the people in the community for Hispanic Heritage Month. And then I'm part of an organization called the We Are All Human Foundation. And they have a Hispanic Star program. I'm one of 90 people included in a book that's coming out, Hispanic Stars Rising, the New Face of Power. Back to you, Suri.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, we'll keep going here. Here are the outcomes we're looking for. We want you to understand, if you don't already, how global cultures vary. It's important to do that. Obviously, the Hispanic culture is part of this, but we want you to get the larger picture of how global cultures vary. We want you to self-assess yourself because everybody's different, everybody's unique. I don't care if you're Hispanic, a Latino, where you're from, but you are a unique person. So while we will tell you about Latino norms, it doesn't mean all of you are going to observe those norms or be even aware of those norms. So we want to understand who you are. So first, we'll give you the broader view. Then we'll drill down on who you are. Then we'll share with you some empirically observed Latino norms. And then we'll talk about some actions that you can take and organizations can take to leverage the strengths that you bring to the table, okay? When we do this, I want you to remember this. We're not going to talk about the visible culture that you see on this page because the visible culture is just what people do. And there are so many variations of that, gestures and genuflections, that we can't get into it. And we will not talk about the core culture at the bottom of the page because that's steeped in our history or geography or sociology. We won't do that. What we will do is look at the middle layer of culture, the values, the beliefs, the philosophies that people hold dear, sometimes without even realizing it. When I share some of these with you, you're going to be surprised, I think, to discover that you actually think this way, because you may not even know that you think this way. But here's the best part of that the middle layer. It is that there are only 7 ways in which global cultures vary, in which they're different from one another. Only 7 ways. Isn't that amazing? I've always find it amazing. And by the way, this is not me saying this. This is a sociologist much smarter than me saying this. So that's what we're going to look at. Now, as we do this, remember, we're not going to talk about cultural etiquette. We're not going to talk about tú versus usted. We're not going to talk about, how we express respect. We're going to talk about how we think, okay? Because how we think and what we believe drives what we do. Number 2, I'm going to tell you about average characteristics of Latinos and Latinas. That doesn't mean every single Latino and Latina are going to think the same way. If they were, all Latinos and Latinas were together in one country, it would probably be one of the top 2 most populated countries in the world. So we cannot expect that everybody is going to be at the average. There's going to be a standard deviation around the average, and we need to remember that. But therefore, we're going to talk about prototypes, not stereotypes. Okay. Okay, right. So let me get rid of the chat box here, and I will open up the chat box as in. Prototypes, not stereotypes. Okay, that means we don't assume that just because the average is a certain way that everybody's going to be that same way. That's a ridiculous assumption. Okay, but it is legitimate to say that the average Latino thinks in this manner. Doesn't mean you do. Lastly, we're going to focus on assessment, not assumption. I'm going to give you enough to be dangerous today. Don't leave the presentation and say, now I know and how Latino, okay, you got to assess. Do some to assess who. So focus on assumption. Danger of sessions like this. The journey we're on, we start with unconscious bias. We're all unconsciously biased. I'm hoping to make you conscious of some of your biases today. If you become conscious of those biases and other people do as well, we can be consciously inclusive. And once we practice conscious inclusion, the nirvana for us is unconscious inclusion. So that's the journey. Let's start out with the demographics. Who are we? I want you to watch this video and it's going to pump you up. Okay, here we go. Hopefully you found that interesting. There were lots of facts in there that I wasn't aware of. Ed, did you want to comment on that video?
Sure, sorry. A couple of things. Let's fast forward to last week. There's an organization that was co-founded by Saul Trujillo called Latitude. And the concept there was letting people know, letting companies know that they're missing the boat if they're not aligned with the Latino economics in the country. So number one, here's a fact. US Latinos equate to a top 10 global economy. If they looked at the GDP, the gross domestic product of the US Latinos, not just from Mexico, but all the Latin American countries in the US, if they looked at that number, that we would be the 8th largest in the world. US Latinos are America's leading entrepreneurs. They have accounted for nearly 80% of all net new businesses created during the last decade. And here's a key one. US Latinos represent the most youthful consumers. That means for people that have products, when they're trying to reach young people, Latinos have larger families. And on average, the ages of those people are younger. So if you're going to build your base of business and your clients, you need to embrace and understand how that culture works. So one thing that also came out just today, I saw a note that Governor Newsom in California signed a bill that's going to require for companies, public companies headquartered in California, they'll have a target to make their boards more of a diversification of cultures. So that's something that, again, people see the business value of what you just saw with the Telemundo video. There are real reasons, not just to be nice or to be social. There are real business reasons as to why you want to connect with these people. So I'm excited to be here with Suri and CTR Proctor to help people understand what the power of ERGs are with this consumer base. Back to you, Suri.
Thanks, Ed. So here's the dynamics of what you see happening. If you look at the birth rates, and this is important to understand and correct misperceptions on, this is the birth rate per woman. You can see Hispanic is close to 3, non-Hispanic white is 1.87, right? Blacks 2.13, Asian 2.04, Native American 1.86. The number of children a generation needs to have to replace itself is 2.07 kids per woman. So clearly, the non-Hispanic whites and the Native Americans don't have a high enough birth rate to replace themselves, which means that they're gradually diminishing in terms of their proportion of the total population. And the piece parts of the US population that are increasing rapidly are Hispanic, Black, and Asian because of the birth rates. It's got nothing to do with immigration, nothing to do with the wall, none of that, okay? And as a result of the birth rates, you can see the percent change in the US population and what the differences are. See that? If you see the bars, Latinos are growing between 2010 and 2050, 109% growth for Latinos. Asians growing at 126%, even higher, and then mixed and other growing at 184%. But you can see the white population is declining in those 40 years by 5%. You with me? So that's, you know, the birth rates that you see above are driving those percentage changes in the population, which is driving the racial profile of the US to be drastically different in 2045 than it is today, or than what it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. In 2045, 25% of the US population will be Hispanic, and 50.3% of the US population going to be minorities, people of color. So the majority is actually going to become the minority in a couple of decades. And it's already happening in a bunch of cities, in a bunch of states, but across the US, that's going to happen. And that's important to keep in mind. Now, given that this is the case, that we are such a massive force, my question to you is this, and this is your first polling question. You're going to see the poll come up. I want you to pick the choice that, you know, instinctively appeals to you the most. How robust is your organization's understanding of Latinx cultural norms, in your opinion? Just pick the choice that makes sense to you. It's completely anonymous. We're going to show you the distribution of your answers once you're done. So the more people that participate, the more representative the distribution is going to be of the people on the call, okay? So please engage in this and pick a choice that makes sense to you. We'll give you a couple seconds here. Your first shot at it is probably the right one, so don't overthink it. Kelvin, can we see the distribution, please, sir? There you go. So poor and moderate, the bottom two boxes are about 73%. Okay. Excellent and superior is 11%. By the way, that's fantastic. If you work in an organization that understands Latino and Latino norms, 11% of you clearly do, that's phenomenal. Okay. But 73% of you work in organizations that are poor or moderate, and actually 89% of us work in companies that are either good, moderate, or poor. So there's plenty of headroom for improvement. So here's my comment to you. Whatever you see here today, spread the wealth, okay? And if you need for us to come in and talk to people in your organization, do that, okay? We are missionaries. We want to spread the message, okay? Here's the global moderating variables that I promised you. There's 7 of them. Here's the first 2. Hierarchy and groups. You're going to hear more about them in a second. Just remember that these are 2 norms that drive how people across the world earn the leadership currency of respect. Here's 2 more. Relationships and communication. Again, these 2 are cultural norms that drive how people around the world earn the currency, leadership currency of trust. Here's the last 3. Time, change, and work. And these are the 3 norms that drive how people earn the currency of credibility. Okay? Taken together, these 7 norms are part of what we call global moderating variables. By the way, I should mention to you, I saw some of you using the chat box. Continue to use the chat box. I'm going to have natural breaks in this presentation where I'm going to open up the chat box and take a look at what you're saying, okay? So please continue to use the chat box. If you feel the urge to speak up, then raise your hand. Towards the top of the screen, you're going to see a little icon that shows like a raised hand. If you raise your hand, we're going to unmute you. We didn't want to just unmute everybody because there's so many people on the call, but if you raise your hand, we will unmute you and then you can speak up as well. So you can interact with us through the chat box and by speaking up as long as you raise your hand first. Here's some more detail about these norms. Remember I told you about hierarchy? Are you authoritarian or egalitarian? Is your view of the world vertical or horizontal? That's what we're talking about here. Groups. Do you think of the world as a team or do you think of the world as an individual? Are you focused on we or me? Okay. Now, I want you to think about where you stand on these, but I'm going to have an assessment that will also get to that. But subjectively, think about, are you more authoritarian? Are you more egalitarian? Okay. Do you think vertically or do you think horizontally? Are you we or me? Here's 2 more: relationships, personal versus professional. When you go into work, are you looking to build strong, close personal relationships because you believe they grease the skids at work? Or are you focused on getting the job done? And you think of any kind of adult chit chat as a waste of time. I'm not saying anything is right or wrong, it's just different. But I want you to think about where you fall in that spectrum between personal relationships versus professional relationships. On communication, implicit versus explicit. Are you a direct communicator or an indirect communicator? Okay. Do you tend to hint at things, tend to be a little bit more sensitive in how you say things, or you typically don't have a filter, whatever is on your mind comes right out? Okay? And then here's the last 3, time, fixed versus fluid. Are you extremely scheduled in the way you think about time? Or is time a fluid concept for you? Sometimes you tend to be late for meetings, tend to be late for work. You don't mean to be disrespectful. It's just time is an expansive notion for you. You get caught up in whatever you're doing in the moment. Change. Are you comfortable with rapid change or do you prefer stability and slow change? Lastly, work. Vocation versus vacation. Do you believe in work being an integral part of your identity and a big part of who you are? Or do you just, work to live, you don't live to work? You believe in work, family, work-life balance, and yeah, you'll work hard, but up to a point. Beyond that, you reserve time for family. Vocation versus vacation. I'm going to leave the slide up for a couple minutes. I want you to look at it, okay? Think about where you stand on these. And think about, what your personality is. We're going to come back to this in a second, but these are the 7 ways in which global cultures are different. In a second, I'm going to show you 50 countries and a continent and how they vary on at least one of these norms, okay? So look at those 7 things, remember those 7 things, and I'm going to ask you a polling question. Now that you've seen those 7 things, okay, and you've thought about where you stand, I'm going to show you where Latino cultures stand on those 7 items that I just showed you. My question to you is, how robust is your own understanding of where you stand on these norms relative to others? How well do you know yourself on these 7 norms relative to others? I'm going to put up that first slide again. Take a look at these. How well do you know where you stand on these 7 norms and relative to other people? Because I will guarantee you all the miscommunication, misperception, misalignments that you might be dealing with at work are stemming from a difference in these norms. I'm going to show you how in a second. In the meantime, can we put up the polling question, Kelvin, please? Thank you, sir. Now, this is a slightly different question than the previous one, right? Previous one, I asked you, how robust is your organization's capability to understand your culture? Now I'm asking you, how well do you know yourself? And I hope to surprise you, you know? I hope a lot of you think that you know yourself well. I would hope that. But I hope I can show you evidence that you might not, okay? Let's see. So let's see the distribution, Kelvin, thanks. There you go. Okay, well, you can see this distribution is much more of a normal distribution. You see the difference? The previous distribution, 73% of us were bottom 2 box scores. Here, most people are in the middle, 38%, okay? About 37% are in the top 2 box, okay? So 37 top 2 box, 38 middle box, and then the bottom 2 box are 25%, okay? So it's more kind of evenly distributed, which you would expect, right? You would think that we would know ourselves pretty well. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Let me show you now what I mean. We're going to drill down into this norm called hierarchy, okay? Here's the definition. This is the first norm. By the way, we will cover 1 norm today. We will have more free sessions that cover additional norms, okay? But we want to take you through 1 norm to give you a sense of how deep we go, and we want you to come back. This is going to be a webinar series. We want you to come back for the next one in the series. And it'll be complimentary. We won't hose you, okay? Don't worry about that. Here's the definition. The way people view authority and power, okay? How much they defer to people in authority, whether they feel entitled to express themselves, and how empowered they feel to make independent decisions and take the initiative. That's the definition of hierarchical orientation. So now that you know a little bit more about this, continue thinking about where you stand on this, right? Do you defer to people in authority a lot? Do you feel like you can express yourself, or do you cover? Do you cover what you're really feeling sometimes and express what you think obliquely, especially when there are people with more seniority and tenure in front of you? Okay, how empowered do you feel to make independent decisions on the job? Take the initiative. Now, this norm impacts a bunch of things. If you're leading an organization, if you're leading a team, it's going to impact how you lead the team, okay? If you're an individual contributor, you don't have direct reports, it's going to impact how you work and how you deal with your immediate manager. So these are the variables that it affects. Is alignment more important to you on your team, or is autonomy more important to you? Do you want everybody to roll, you know, in a cadence in the same direction, or do you prefer to have cowboys and cowgirls in your team, right? Autonomy versus alignment. How much frequency and detail is required in reporting? Do you need people to report in every day, a couple times a day, a couple times a week, once a month? So, you know, if the more detail you need in reporting, the more hierarchical you are, you know? The general tone and tenor of conversations. Do you have conversations where you treat everybody as an intellectual peer? Hey, you're just a colleague of mine. It may say that you report to me in the org chart, but I know as much or as little as you. We're all together. Or is it more, hey, I know more than you. I've been around longer, so you need to recognize that when you talk to me. And the amount and nature of guidance offered. You offer a lot of guidance, you offer limited guidance. All of these things are in by this norm. Now that you know a little bit more, I'm going to ask you to do this individual assessment. There are 5 statements here. Rate these 5 statements in terms of how much you agree with those statements, okay? If you agree strongly, give yourself a 5. If you disagree strongly, give yourself a 1, okay? If you moderately agree, that's a 4. If you moderately disagree, that's a 2. And if you're in the middle, then give yourself a 3. Now, before you do that, make sure, if you are thinking of 3s, you're hedging your bets. I'm not saying you don't put in a 3, but be careful before you put in a 3 that it actually represents who you are, okay? So on each of these statements, scale of 1 through 5, 5 standing for strongly agree, 1 standing for strongly disagree. You with me? And then 2, 3, or 4 in the middle. Go ahead and rate yourself and come up with a total score for those 5 things. Your total score should be between 5 and 25. If it is not, you're doing something wrong. You're either adding it wrong or scoring yourself wrong. The total score should be between 5 and 25. Take a couple seconds and do that, okay? Now, let me tell you as you're working on it what this means. Let us say you are an individual, as an example, an individual X, and your score falls in the 10 to 13 range, okay? You have another individual X prime, that could be your boss, it could be your subordinate, it could be a colleague, okay? Doesn't matter who, but you have another individual X prime who is 14 to 17. What does that mean? What does that mean? Now, if you're on the left-hand side of the grid, that means you're more egalitarian. The lower your total score, the more egalitarian you are. I'm going to ask you a polling question shortly about this. So hold on to that score of yours, okay? I'm just explaining. If you're on the right-hand side of the grid, you're more authoritarian, okay? The higher the score, the more authoritarian you are. If you're in the middle, 14 to 17, then you're kind of in the middle, you're balanced, okay? Now, if you are X and you have an individual X prime who is to the right of you, what does that mean? Based on what I just said, it means X prime is going to be more authoritarian than you, okay? Or put it another way, you are more egalitarian than X prime. Now, I'm going to put on an additional twist. What if X prime is your boss and you work for them? What does that mean? If X prime is your boss and they're more authoritarian than you, how are you going to look at them? You're going to potentially think that they're micromanaging you. Hey, I can't even go to the bathroom without raising my hand and checking, man. You know, if they just let me do my darn job. Have you ever felt this way at work? If you do, you know, this may be the result of a misperception, miscommunication, misalignment because of this variable. It's not that they're a bad person. It's that they're thinking more hierarchically than you are, okay? So now the flip side, how do you think they're gonna view you if you are more egalitarian than them and you report to them? They might think, you know, half the time I don't know what the heck they're doing. They don't check in with me. When I give them advice, they don't take it. They don't report to me as often as I want them to. You see what I mean? Okay, now, this is the issue on this variable. If you are in adjacent columns, then there's a discrepancy. If you're in the same column, then you'll be perfectly aligned, okay? If you're in adjacent columns, there's a bit of a misalignment. If your 2 columns are more away from another person, oh boy, you got a lot of problems, okay? Take the same example I gave you and change the situation a little bit, okay? You are still X and X prime is still, you know, there, that's an individual. But now you are X and you're the boss. You're egalitarian than more egalitarian than the other person, and you're their boss. How do you think you're going to view them? Remember, this is now X prime is an authoritarian subordinate. You are an egalitarian boss. How are you going to view them? They need a lot of help. They keep asking me what to do next. It's like babysitting. I didn't expect this. They need too much care and feeding, man. You know. Now, how are they going to view you? They're never there for me. You know, he or she just tells me, you know, the general direction and then doesn't really tell me how to get there. I set up meetings with them and they cancel the meetings. You know, they're a boss. They're not there. They're absent. I don't get enough guidance from them. You see all of the misperceptions that happen because of this one misalignment. Now, remember, there are 7 norms, okay? So imagine how multiplicative this gets in terms of the divisiveness and the misalignment that results from the norms not being aligned. Now, if X and X prime are in the same column, you're golden because you won't have a problem on this norm. But if they're in different columns, you got an issue. That's what we call interpersonal distance. You with me? So now I have kind of, hopefully you've taken a look at where you are. I want you to look at this question and answer this polling question. I'm very curious to know where you break out on this. Take a look at this question. Kelvin's going to put up the polling question and pick the range where your score fell. By the way, remember, there's no wrong or right in this. No matter where you are, there is no shame, there is no guilt, there is no blame, okay? Wherever you are is where you are. There's just differences, and that's what we're all about. It's about understanding diversity, okay, in all its forms, and being inclusive towards diversity. That's all we're trying to do. Remember the journey, unconscious bias to conscious bias. We're trying to make you conscious of your own biases and other people's biases so that we can be inclusive. That's all we're doing. No wrong or right here. So go ahead, Kelvin. What's the distribution look like, buddy? Okay, now look at that. Very interesting, right? So you see how this is skewed towards the egalitarian side, right? 24% are balanced. You didn't listen to me. You gave yourself threes, didn't you? Okay, that's fine. But 24% of you are balanced. 41% are moderately egalitarian. 9% are highly egalitarian. So 50% of us are center left, more egalitarian, okay? 27% of us are center right, more authoritarian, okay? Now, I'm going to show you, now you know how you're distributed and you know how you are. I'm going to show you how the Latino culture thinks, okay? So here's the country assessment. Now, this is research done by Geert Hofstede, who's an Austrian sociologist, and his team. And they're continuously adding more countries to this grid, okay? But this is, we took a lot of esoteric academic research and we made it more accessible. Now you might say it doesn't look very accessible to me, sorry, but hang in there. I'm going to explain this to you in a second, okay? But so he has written, you know, theses and dissertations on each country. But we took all of that and we compressed it into this grid. This is the exact same grid on which you rated yourself, okay? Exact same grid. Left-hand side, more egalitarian. Right-hand side, more authoritarian. 50 countries and one continent, the continent of Africa, because the sample sizes right now for the research are not big enough to include the subtending countries in Africa, okay? But they're continuously collecting more data, and as they keep doing that, we're gonna put more countries on this grid in Africa. But for now, we have 50 countries and a continent, okay? Look at all the countries for a second. Remember, left-hand side, center left is more egalitarian. Center right is more authoritarian. What do you see? I wish I could see the chat box. Let me see. Let me open up the chat box and see what you guys are saying. Okay, hang on one second. And I know you can see my screen. Yanil has issues with the images and the sound. If other people have the same issue, tell me, okay? And we'll try to fix it. It could be the broadband bandwidth issue, but if it's only Yanil, then it's probably at your end, my friend, okay? But we'll try to fix it. If more people are having issues with blurry imaging and with choppy sound, please mention it in the chat box. I don't see any of the comments in the chat box. So Natalie's saying issues, okay. Okay, well, let me see if I can get onto a better broadband, okay? I'll see if I can do that while I'm talking. In the meantime, take a look at this and look at the pattern of distribution of these countries. Look at the countries in the very low authoritarian, meaning highly egalitarian: Australia, Canada, Denmark, Netherlands, New Zealand, Israel. I don't know if you guys have lived in these countries or worked in these countries or worked with people from these countries, okay? Think about how they were, but chances are they're highly egalitarian. By the way, remember, a big percentage of the folks in this room, 50% of us, are on the left-hand side here, okay? Look at where the US is. You see where the US is? low authoritarian. It's not in the extreme left, but it's on the second to the extreme left. Finland, Norway, Sweden. Now, look on the right-hand side, okay? What do you see? You see the countries in green, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Spain. You see that? Those are all Spanish-speaking countries. Well, Brazil speaks Portuguese, but they also speak Spanish, but and Argentina as well. You can see all of those countries are center-right. They're not all the way to the right, but they are center-right. What does that mean? That means that in those countries, the cultures tend to be directionally more authoritarian, okay? Now, look at some of the countries in blue. Those are Asian countries. They're also center-right. Look at the countries in yellow. Those are Middle Eastern or Mediterranean countries, also center-right. In fact, look at the very high column, almost exclusively composed of blue, which is Asian countries, Middle Eastern, and you have the continent of Africa, okay? Certainly you see a lot of blue, green in the high column as well. Now, center left, the countries that are center left are all Caucasian majority countries. They're all Caucasian majority countries. It is, and it's amazing how all of the color, literally and figuratively on this page, is center right. All of the minority culture countries are center right. They tend to be more authoritarian. It's an important insight to remember. This group flouts this norm. 50% of us are egalitarian, directionally, okay? But what this is saying is the culture of our heritage countries are more authoritarian, and that's okay. But it's important for us to understand this difference between Latino cultures on average and Caucasian cultures on average, because this has huge implications for how things happen at work, okay? And this—
Let me give the audience an example of something that I work through. Again, my background is Native American, Mexican American, second generation, working for that publishing company that I mentioned earlier. My assignment, my boss was Canadian, very egalitarian. And my challenge was to make contact and develop a relationship with a CEO group of people in Japan. One thing I started to learn about how could we possibly extend our conference business from North America into Japan, I learned, first of all, when we weren't getting as many senior executives, Japanese, coming to our conferences in the US, I learned that one of the things that was a factor was that if they did not speak impeccable English, they would be embarrassed or in their culture lose face. And so they would send lower echelon people to our conferences. When I had a chance to establish a rapport with the president of the trade association of this nonwovens technology, because of my background and the respect that I showed to a gentleman, Sato-san was older than me, and I got my business card printed with Japanese on the back, and I bowed down to give that to him. We established a relationship to the point where he invited me to Japan to introduce me to C-suite executives there that we needed to partner with for this thing to happen. My boss went with me on the first trip. I had a chance to make presentations because he was going to, Sato-san was translating for me to these executives and endorsing me on this idea about what we were going to do is present our conferences with this content in simultaneous translation, like they did at the United Nations. So if you're Japanese, you can hear the English speakers translated in the moment in Japanese, and they could speak freely in Japanese and the audience could hear them in English. So helping understand, or me getting the opportunity to get a relationship established, there was also this little nuance where if you're Japanese and you say hi, that doesn't mean that you agree with the other person. That means you heard them, versus the egalitarian Canadian boss of mine. He thought everybody was on the same page. So when it came down to doing the follow-up visits to set this up, I was the one that was invited back to develop that. We did not do the traditional marketing. We did not do the traditional sales types of things when we got people to attend our conferences. It was basically on a handshake with these CEOs, that they guaranteed me personally that they would have people attend this conference. One little footnote, this ring that I have is my law school ring from Santa Clara University. A gentleman that we were having dinner, through a translator we were talking, he asked me, where did I go to school to get this? And I told him Santa Clara University. And through the translator, he said, my brother is going there. So again, these personal relationships really made the difference for that to be a successful. And we sold out the conference when we were there. Back to you, Suri.
Thanks, Ed. The concept I want to emphasize here is if you look at where X is, remember X and X prime, and we talked about interpersonal distance. I want you to think about that interpersonal distance between you and your boss, you and your colleagues, you and your subordinates. So keep that in mind. It's not so much where you are in absolute terms, it's where you are relative to others that causes the misalignment. Now I want you to see the difference between X and Y, where you are and where the origin country might be. So some of you might be first generation, second generation, third generation immigrants into this country, okay? You may have grown up here, but you still see the influences of your heritage country at home. So, but many of you seem to have acculturated well to the US environment. The US in this case is a domicile country, Y prime. So the US and you are in the same, column, but X is in a different column than Y, the country of origin. And that's happened with me as well. India, in this example, and I'm originally from India, is on the extreme right, highly authoritarian. Well, I'm highly egalitarian, but when I first came to this country, I was very authoritarian, very respectful to everybody, calling everybody sir and ma'am. And people would say, no, sir is my dad, call me by my first name. I had a very difficult time doing that, and now I have the opposite problem. People tell me I don't respect them enough, because I'm all the way over on the left-hand side. But that's because I got deculturated from my country of origin and acculturated the country of my domicile, where I'm living. So those are concepts to understand. Now I want you to see how organizations behave, because your success or lack thereof, and I hope it's success, in whatever organization you're in depends upon the fit between your culture and how your personality and the culture of the organization. If you're on the left-hand side of the grid, highly egalitarian, but you're working in an authoritarian organization, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. It's not who you are, it's who you are relative to others, right? Remember that. So look at, I'm not going to read this out, but look at egalitarian organizations versus authoritarian organizations and get a sense of how well does your norm of either, and remember there's about 27% of us that are authoritarian. The same thing would apply to you guys. If you're an authoritarian mindset and you're working in an egalitarian organization, maybe it's a startup, maybe it's a smaller company, you're gonna have a tough time adjusting. And you may not realize why, but now you can put a finger on it and say, okay, this is what's going on, okay? But look at the list on the left, egalitarian versus authoritarian organizations, and it's vastly different. The culture is vastly different. And now I'm introducing Z and Z prime, okay? So where you are versus where your company is, and how different are they? And then if you deal with clients, where are your clients? So you have Z prime is the client, Z is the company. So this little grid can capture a lot of distances and deviations between you and your company, you and the country of your origin country, the heritage country, you and other people. Okay, and that's what this framework really tries to do. You have enough now to hopefully be able to assess people who are in front of you, who you deal with, to say, where do you think they might stand? Where do you think they might stand, okay, on these norms? Now, let's talk a little bit about what this means. Remember I said Latino cultural values tend to be center-right, more authoritarian. A lot of you are not that way, okay? But that's the prevalent average in Latino culture. Automatic deference to authority, respect granted more easily to age, okay? Power and knowledge. So what are the implications? Latinos may tend to avoid criticizing, challenging, or expressing contradictory opinions to their managers. Now, if you are doing some of that, okay, be aware of it, that what's driving it is this tendency to be respectful and deferential to authority. That's built into you. It's in the genes, okay? Confronting a superior, especially in public, may be viewed as disobedient and breaks the bond between employee and supervisor. Accepting instructions without question from their managers, even when a task seems unreasonable, may be the cultural norm. Have you ever done that? You know, your boss told you to do something by a certain date. You felt you couldn't do it, but you didn't want to say no. You wanted to please, and you just kind of took it on. And then if you didn't deliver, you end up getting a reputation for not delivering on time, but it was undoable from the beginning because of that hierarchical tendency not to speak up, okay? Latinos may see themselves as being respectful, but non-Latinos may view that behavior as being passive, okay, or subservient. So keep that in mind. This is a strong cultural norm of respeto. That's what we call it, respeto, okay? Now, how do you bridge? We want you to be who you are, don't change. Many of you are not this way, right? Many of you are more egalitarian. But for those of you that are center right, think about this. In many cases, respect can be earned without tenure, without seniority, through subject matter expertise. So if you're relatively junior, relatively new to the company, then focus on becoming the most informed person in your space that there is. And you will find people automatically start respecting you, even if you're relatively junior or don't have a lot of time in the organization. Okay. And some of the implications of that, obviously, continue to be respectful. Ed is a great example. Ed is always respectful, but he'll push back on me. He'll push back on the other folks, you know, in the organization when needed in a very respectful way. So keep that in mind. Constructive dissent is an obligation. In this country, remember in the US, which is a fairly egalitarian country, if you don't speak up, people are going to say, well, I don't see them as a leader. I don't know if they have strong opinions and if they can defend them. But you might have strong opinions. You're just choosing not to speak up. But the misperception is, oh, I'm not sure this person is a strong leader. So,
and sorry, we've got about 3 minutes now.
Thank you. Yeah. So think about that: constructive dissent, having defensible and independent opinions, standing up for them, and becoming a recognized expert, you know, in the professional domain. Okay, those are important skills. Okay, be innovative at generating ideas and intrepid in claiming them. Now, you've seen this one norm. We have 6 more norms, and I've just given you a quick sampling. I want you to tell us, so that we can support you the best going forward, which of these 3 things would be most beneficial for you, and we will make sure we provide that. Okay, so it's a PDF version of this presentation. We can provide that if you think that would be useful. You can pick more than one. Okay, complementary text-based coaching. It'll be purely text-based, you know, but we can do that, or more complementary sessions like this, which we're happy to provide. So just pick any and all of these 3, and we'll bear that in mind. It's good feedback for us. So take a second. We won't reveal the results of this, okay? So don't worry about that. Just pick whatever you think makes sense. We'll leave it up there for a couple seconds. And let's move ahead, Kelvin. Okay. Now, this is the Latino leadership model that you will see more of in future sessions. We saw the first rung of this, respeto, okay? You have comunidad, which is the whole idea of personal relationships, okay? Comunidad. Amistad, the whole idea of being friendly, you know, relationships versus task. Comunidad is we versus me, okay? Latinos typically tend to be more on the side of we. It's more about the team than about the individual, okay? Amistad is more about personal relationships, friendliness. Diplomacia, that's the whole idea of indirect communication, right? Focusing on being indirect. Presente, focusing on the time right now, you know, fluid time. Latinos tend to be more fluid on time, okay? Estabilidad, this is the whole idea of change, slower change. Latino norms tend to be more focused on steadiness, stability. And the last piece, work-life balance. Familia, this is more focus on family, more focus on work-life balance. Work is important, but it's not the most important thing. So these are the remaining 6 that we will not cover today, that I hope we get to cover in future sessions. This is sort of a good, you know, a summary slide that talks about the global moderating variables, the Latino cultural values, and then some performance enhancing actions. So the idea is cherish your values, be aware of them first, and then develop your skills so that there is some dexterity, cultural dexterity, as you're interacting with people around you. There's a source list that you can refer to, okay? I mentioned to you, we have this Latino Leadership Series. If you want to, experience that, let us know. It's easy to find us. I'll remind you about the book. Don't worry about the polling question. Here's how to reach us, okay? And we are right on time. So, Kelvin, are there any comments in the chat box that we should address? You might be on mute, my friend.
Yes, we do have a couple questions.
Okay.
We'll go with Megdalia. She said, it's interesting, I fall in the middle, but I'm not related to any of the countries listed.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, if the country of your heritage country is not on the list, then it's probably being worked on by, remember I told you Geert Hofstede and his team are continuously adding more countries. And so chances are over time, whatever heritage country you're from will appear on the list. But chances are that a lot of the Spanish speaking countries will cluster in a certain spot on that grid, even if your country doesn't appear on the list. And if you're in the middle, Megdalia, what that says is you're able to flex. I mean, I don't know you, but I know you. Like these numbers never lie. I've done so many assessments of people. I mean, we do formal assessments as well, but I can guarantee you that you're pretty flexible. You will be able to survive in an authoritarian environment if needed, and in an egalitarian environment, because you're right down the middle, chances are, okay? Which is great. Thank you. Any other questions, Kelvin?
Yes. Kathy asks, when was the data collected and is it changing?
Yes, it is changing. So they're continuously updating it. There are differences as newer generations come in, okay? Even in countries that are highly authoritarian like India, if you are a baby boomer in India versus a Gen Yer or a Gen Zer, your profile is going to be different, okay? Because obviously cultures change as newer generations pop up. So it is ongoing research, and the grids that you see are continuously updated, but it's not done every year. It's done about every 3 or 4 years that you'll see them updated. So if you were to come back 3 years from now, you probably see some of these countries changing in their position on the grid. That's an excellent question as well.
And we have a comment. We have one comment for Ed as well.
Yeah.
From Monica. She said, that may work for you because you're male. I worked for a Japanese company for 20 years, and as a woman, it took me years to earn their respect. Very well worth the wait, as it's a wonderful culture.
That's a great point, and that's a very good point. There are differences. That's the second point. So there are interactive effects of generation.
Let me just jump in, Suri. My wife is Japanese American, and we have been married over 40 years. So it does take a while to have a good relationship.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point, Ed. I forgot. Yeah, Ed's married to. Ed's wife is Japanese. Well, thank you for those comments, Kathy. Anything else, Kelvin? You might be on mute again, buddy.
No, no, that's it for the most of the comments. Let me see. We get a lot of compliments on the presentation, and a lot of people can't wait to see the next one.
Well, we always love to hear that. We will let you know as usual through LinkedIn when the next session is going to be. Please show up, and we'll keep going through these norms. If you think this will be beneficial at your company, feel free to reach out to us, okay? And even if you're not in a decision-making role, maybe you can connect us to somebody that would be the right person to talk to, and be happy to do it for your companies as well. Thank you all for being here. It's been awesome. Ed, I appreciate your being my wingman and stepping in periodically to offer your insights and comments. We will do this again soon. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and we will look forward to meeting up with you guys again real soon. Thank you, and good evening.
Thank you all.